The Capitol is buzzing with bills and the budget. We check in to see what work is getting done in the final days of the legislative session. We're going to talk about bail reform and bullying. Also, a familiar face in Connecticut's political landscape is moving on. Chris Healy is here to talk about being a Republican in Connecticut these days. Hi, you're watching The Real Story. I'm Lori Perez. The headlines are all about the budget, but there is plenty of other work to be done during this legislative session. One of the bills with some legs this year is one we've heard about before, the push to reform bail bond regulations. We caught up with Representative May Flexer on why this might be the session for change. Thanks, Representative Flexer, for being here. Representative May Flexer is the chair of the Domestic Violence Task Force, and lots going on here this session as they try to get some work done. Tell me some of the highlights.
Well, over the past 2 years, the Domestic Violence Task Force has been able to push forward a lot of important pieces of legislation. Last year, we passed the most sweeping reforms of our state's domestic violence laws in almost 25 years. That included a number of different provisions, including funding for the 24-hour day, 7-day-a-week staffing of our domestic violence shelters throughout the state. It also created new dedicated domestic violence dockets in courts throughout our state and set up a pilot program for the GPS monitoring of the most high-risk domestic violence offenders.
So it was a very successful year for you last year. What are you hoping to get through this year that might be new?
Well, this year we were hoping for a number of things. First of all, the continuation of the 24-hour day, 7-day-a-week funding for our shelters. The funding was included in the budget that we passed this year, so I'm really grateful for the fact that all of our state's domestic violence shelters will be able to continue operating 24/7. We are also pushing for a number of new domestic violence dockets to be created, dedicated dockets in our courts, just like we did last year. Our goal is to have a domestic violence docket in every court in the state.
And let's talk about that. And doing that creates a special focus so that things don't get lost in the fray?
That's right. What happens in a domestic violence docket is that you have a judge who is specifically trained in domestic violence, a prosecutor who's specifically trained in domestic violence, and a victim advocate who's able to follow the case and work with the victim all the way through. So when you have people who are especially trained to deal with these cases, which are unique. Domestic violence is much different than most other crimes that we see prosecuted in our courts. You get a better outcome not only for the victim, but potentially for the offender as well.
Okay, and I also read that there are some unique new ideas about how to address teen violence.
Yes. Last year we were able to move forward with a proposal to increase the training that teachers get concerning domestic violence and teen dating violence, and to encourage our school systems to provide information about healthy relationships to young people in their schools. Teen dating violence is unfortunately a really serious problem in Connecticut. 20% of teenagers will report having experienced teen dating violence by the time they graduate from high school. So we're also looking to make sure that teenagers have access to the same protections that any other victim of domestic violence would have, and that's one of the things that's in the legislation this year.
And specifically meaning like restraining orders?
Yes, we're clarifying the existing statute to make it clear that a person can apply for a restraining order regardless of their age.
Interesting. And also a very significant piece of legislation that's up that I know that has been through the years talked about is bail bond reform. And talk about where we are with that.
Well, bail bond reform has been a priority of our work in the task force this year. Tragically, last January, Shengel Rasim was murdered in West Haven, Connecticut by her husband, and that murder was a direct result of our state's bail bond system failing her as a victim. We've been working with a number of different advocates who have pushed for bail bond reform over the last almost decade, and I'm really hopeful that this is the year that Connecticut will finally pass meaningful bail bond reform.
And the issue is that there's this system of undercutting that unscrupulous bail bondsmen sometimes use, where they'll undercharge defendants the amount that they are required to pay. And how will this prevent that?
Well, the practice that you're talking about is unfortunately rampant in our court system. Bondsmen have unfortunately become almost notorious for engaging in this undercutting practice in order to get business from offenders. And so the proposal that we're working on this year would eliminate that practice, would require that any person who's posting bail and dealing with the bondsman would have to pay a 35% down payment. So that practice of undercutting would be eliminated. The proposal would also put more oversight by the insurance department on bondsmen so that they would have to comply with regulations, and the insurance department would finally be able to enforce those regulations and also to conduct random audits of bondsmen and their business practices.
And how will they be able to enforce it? Because I know that has been one issue, right? Is that how does the insurance department enforce it? Should they be the ones? Should it be the Department of Public Safety? I mean, do they have the resources to address that kind of thing?
It does, actually. There's a fee that is going to be required for all bondsmen to be licensed by the insurance department. It's a $450 fee, and that fee will go back to the insurance department to help them fund the regulatory enforcement that they need.
And you're hopeful that, as of this taping, you're hopeful that this will get passed. Why is it, do you think, that it seems to be having more leverage this year perhaps than in years past?
Well, I think over the years, advocates for bail bond reform have done a really good job of trying to push this measure forward. And sometimes, unfortunately, in this building, it takes time to pass things. And I think with the added focus of the Domestic Violence Task Force, we finally, I am hopeful, are able to push this measure over the top and receive final passage.
And the Domestic Violence Task Force, just to let people know, it's a bipartisan commission.
Yes, the task force is made up of members of both parties and members of the House and the Senate, and we've been able to work in a really cooperative and comprehensive way to put together these measures to both prevent domestic violence and protect victims of domestic violence.
So in this, it's obviously a very difficult budget year. Have some of the programs been at risk?
Well, we were concerned, obviously, in a difficult budget year about the continuation of the 24/7 funding. Much of the other initiatives that we've put forward, we've done our best to try to find ways to do them without spending additional resources. That's why we've worked cooperatively with the judicial branch to create those new domestic violence dockets that we talked about earlier, trying to do those sorts of things within available resources.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Representative Flexler, for spending time with us today. I know it's a busy session, and we wish you good luck for the rest of it.
Thank you.
Coming up next, lawmakers make a move to help keep teens safe. They say giving vital training to people who work with children.